Yeah, I'll just go ahead and apologize for the lack of editing right now.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is standing on my desk and looking out the window. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. This is an episode. Not sure how to classify the episode because I'm a bit under the gun in putting this together, and as you can obviously tell, it's late. How late? We'll just have to see. I am still a bit under the weather. I know I mentioned in the last episode that I got booted back to my old department. I don't remember if I mentioned that they fired one of the guys in the department on my shift the same day. This pretty much clued me in that the real reason they wanted me back there was because they had to get rid of everyone else in the department on third shift. This was basically confirmed when I worked with the remaining guy on the shift. He was slow. Stuff that should have only taken him a few minutes to do took him almost an hour. He only lasted about 2 days after they moved me back, which meant that I got to work 10 and 12-hour days. It was around this time that I realized I needed to go see a doctor. Fuzznuts, stop beating the microphone with your tail. And the reason I needed to see the doctor was because, obviously, I had bronchitis. Problem is that while I have good health insurance, I don't have a doctor. And with all the hours I was putting in, I didn't really have the time to find one. Universal healthcare would solve this shit, since I wouldn't have spent most of the past 10 years or so going to the clinic for the uninsured, and I'd actually have a doctor. So my solution was to go to the urgent care clinic, aka the Doc in a Box, which is located close to the house. A handy feature of that is I could visit them on Saturday and could spend all of Friday sleeping after I got off of work, which is what I did. So I go down there on Saturday, and even though I'm the only person there, it still takes them about an hour to see me for some strange reason. So I get the exam and they're like, "Yeah, you've got bronchitis." And they write me a couple of prescriptions, one of which is for amoxicillin. And I'm not allergic to any medications that I know of, so I don't really think anything about it because it's been 10, 15 years or so since I've taken amoxicillin. Get the prescription filled, take the amoxicillin, and about half an hour later I realize, oh, I know why it's been so long since I've taken amoxicillin. Amoxicillin rips the fuck out of my stomach. So I end up laying on the couch just in pretty much agony. Fortunately, I happen to have posted this on Facebook that I was in pain because of the amoxicillin, and somebody said, "Oh, here's how you fix that. Bunch of antacids or acid reducers." So I tried that, and sure enough, that worked. I also figured out that, hey, if you have a lot of food in your stomach at the time you take it, and you take the acid reducers, you don't have the problems. But it still took forever for that shit to kick in the first time. So, needless to say, I didn't work on the fucking episode because, well, I was in freaking pain. I think you can understand that. So, what you're getting is just sort of improvisational as far as this episode, but I'll do my best to make it interesting. Ash is doing better. He's still not as he hasn't filled out completely yet, but he is definitely not as bony as he was. Let's not leave the microphone alone. Come on, buddy. Come here. There you go. Good boy. He, and it's interesting how different his personality is to Fuzznuts. Because Fuzznuts just fucking comes up to me and is like, you will love me now. I demand to be loved. Ash comes up to me and he's like, hey, can I get some lovin'? I'd really like some lovin', man. So, but he's definitely he's definitely feeling a lot better, and he's more expressive and interactive. Like, I don't have to pull him up onto the bed with me. He will sometimes hop up on his own. It's difficult for him to do since he doesn't have any front claws, but he will do it occasionally. And he does not, for whatever reason, he does not like being on top of me. He'll lay beside me, but not on me. He will put his front paws on me and make biscuits, which is, sweet. Means he's happy. So I'm glad about that. He seems to be settling in. I haven't tried introducing him and Fuzznuts yet. I want to get Fuzznuts vaccinated before I do that, because I don't know when the last time Ash was vaccinated, and I don't want to get him vaccinated if he was vaccinated this year, because there can be problems with that. Not always, but there can be. So get Fuzznuts vaccinated, and that'll protect Fuzznuts from anything. And since Fuzznuts doesn't have anything, because he doesn't go outside, I shouldn't have to worry about Ash catching anything from Fuzznuts. Yes, you're a good Fuzznuts. Mr. Shed. He's shedding something fierce. Okay, now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about, since I just did not have time to prep the episode. I was planning on doing it on Saturday, but I couldn't since I was sick, and of course I couldn't do anything during the week last week because I was putting in all those fucking hours. And I put in 12 hours today. And it's 1:30 in the afternoon, and I really should be in bed, but I'm recording this because I know I'm not going to have another chance to do it this week. So, but yeah, something that struck me at work a while back, and I wanted to talk about it. There was a guy there, and he worked briefly in one of the departments. This one department, for some reason, has just this insanely high turnover rate. I don't know why. I've heard different stories, but I don't know anything for a fact. But anyways, this guy and I got to talking because he lives in the trailer park. And I knew him. I'd seen him around, but I didn't know his name or anything like that. And so, fairly early on in the conversation, he's telling me, yeah, I got saved when I was 16, so I don't have to worry about that. And his attitude about it was like if he paid his taxes early or something. Filed his taxes early. And I got to thinking about that statement, because what he is saying, whether he consciously realizes it or not, is he's saying that, well, because he's been saved, he doesn't have to worry about going to hell no matter what he does. That's a pretty disturbing thought. And I know there's the whole, thing about, well, if religion's the only thing keeping you from murdering people, then, you're pretty much a shitty person. But there's more to it than that, because this, what this is you've got somebody who before they've been saved, but after they've learned about Christianity and that bad people go to hell, is they're so paralyzed by the idea that they could end up in hell, they can't really function. And by getting saved, that burden is lifted off of them. They don't have to worry. They know they're not going to go to hell. So it frees them up. And it allows them to, negate some of the consequences of their actions. Because, if the ultimate punishment is damnation, and you no longer have to worry about that because you know you're going to be forgiven for whatever you do, then, even small infractions, moral infractions, aren't very bad in your eyes. And I'm not talking like murder or anything like that, but, you've been saved, so who cares if you steal that candy bar? Who cares if you cheat on your spouse or your significant other? Yeah, sure, that you'll hurt them, but you're not going to hell. And I was raised Lutheran, so we didn't have anything like, well, you gotta accept Jesus in your heart, and then you'll be saved. Salvation was an ongoing process. If you were bad today and died, you could go to hell. Whereas, if you're saved, then you're automatically forgiven, so you don't have to worry. You're not going to go to hell if you do something bad. And when I realized that, it explained to me how all these people I have known over the years who claim to be devout Christians of the Baptist variety, because that's what this guy was, that's the kind of church you hear a lot of people saying, that I got saved. They tend to be Baptists, at least in this area. They would do all these things that weren't really Christian. And I'm not talking the usual crap that every Christian, or, not every Christian, but lots of Christians ignore. The whole premarital sex thing, or wearing mixed fibers, or what have you. But just, attitudes. So, well, you got, like the guy, the people that have the businesses that, have Christian symbols plastered all over the place, but rip other people, rip their customers off. And it's like, well, how can, they justify that? Oh, they've been saved, so it doesn't matter. They know deep down in their soul that they're going to heaven because they've accepted Jesus in their heart and he's forgiven them. So it's the get out of jail free, or the escape clause for the escape clause. And it also reminds me of they'll point out that you're going, no matter how good a person you are, you're going to have a shitty life because the world is sinful and it's shitty, blah blah blah. So the logical thing to do in that situation would be to fucking kill yourself. That way you go straight to heaven and you're with God and everything's a paradise. And then they throw out, whoa, no. See, it's a sin to kill yourself and then you'll go to hell. Because, of course, if you killed yourself, they'd lose a follower. And, eventually there'd be no one left. That would be bad. And the money would stop rolling in at that point. The money and the power. So that's just been rumbling around in my head. Because since I wasn't raised Baptist or anything like that, where they do a big deal about accepting Jesus and getting saved, I never thought anything about it. And it was only just the way the guy said, I got saved when I was 16, so I got that over with. Don't have to worry about that anymore. Yeah, don't have to worry about going to hell. So it doesn't matter what you do with your life, whether you're a good person or not. You've accepted Jesus, so you're going to heaven. Yeah, that's a nice little out there for you, buddy. Okay. The other thing, and I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this because this is kind of important, is you may have heard that Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti, is saying that he's going to run for president in 2020 if the Democrats don't put forth a candidate he thinks is a viable candidate. Now, for a lot of reasons, I will say that I do not think that Michael Avenatti would make a very good president. However, he is using the right tactics to beat Trump in the election. And that's what should concern everybody. Because Avenatti is doing what Hoffer suggests to do when you're confronted with a mass movement. You want to stop it. He is, coming at Trump on an emotional plane and hitting Trump in ways that fire up people's emotions. And this isn't a bad thing at all. Because, if people are fired up and emotional and excited about a Democratic candidate, it's going to be infectious. It's going to get other people to want to support that candidate. It's going to motivate them to go vote. There was, for all her admirable qualities, there was not a lot of emotion around Hillary outside of the bickering between the Hillary supporters and Sanders supporters. She could go out, she could give a good speech or whatever, but she couldn't quite fire up the crowds like Sanders could or Trump could. And that made it hard for people who are low information voters and on the fence and don't really pay attention to all the issues to get interested, to get excited about her. And that's not Hillary's fault. Not everybody can do that. Very few people can do that. Obama could do it beautifully. I've said in the past, first I heard of Obama was when he gave the keynote speech at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, and I heard it on NPR. I didn't watch the convention. I just heard the speech the following morning, and I missed, the details of who Obama was. I heard a funny-sounding name, but nothing about it clued me in on the ethnicity. Thought maybe he was Greek or something. I had no idea. I had a Kenyan father. And I heard the speech, or the clip they played, and I was like, well, why the fuck isn't this guy running? He's saying what we want to hear in a way we want to hear it, whereas John Kerry was, I think that, and Kerry would have been a better president than W. But he lacked the ability to get people excited like Obama had. And the same is true of Hillary. There was, in this message board I participated in, there was a guy who, he posted this article. And he's like, well, see, this is the problem that the Democrats have. And the article was this piece of garbage, supposedly written by a gay black man who, felt that the Democrats were really the racist people because they were so focused on things like identity politics. He just couldn't support them anymore, and he was going Republican. And, he was walking away from the Democratic Party. Everybody, not everybody, but a large number of people in the group, on the board, were like, dude, that is Russian propaganda. That's not, a legit story. And this guy is like, well, just because the site's the website's Russian doesn't mean, that this isn't actually happening. And it's like, no, dude, you do not understand. It's not happening. It's all lies. It's propagated by the Russians to convince people like you who are on the Republican side of things that the Democratic Party is falling apart over things like, racism, gender issues, trans issues, gay rights, things like that. And so, no, dude, this isn't happening. That's not, people aren't saying, well, I'm just, upset with the Democrats because they're too focused on gay rights, so I'm going to vote for the Republicans. That's not happening. Nobody's really saying that. I mean, the people I've seen who are complaining about the Democratic Party, who are liberals, are complaining because Tom Perez has just decided that, well, we're going to start accepting donations from certain groups that we said we weren't going to. And there's some dispute over exactly what types of groups he's actually saying that they can accept donations from. They're they're tied to fossil fuels companies, but, I saw one article that said, no, these are not donations from the companies themselves. They're donations from the employee organizations like the union that represent people who work for those companies. Or if that particular company is actually putting a significant amount of money into green energy research, then yes, the Democrats will accept money from them. And there's a lot of people saying, well, I'm just not going to vote for them now, or I'm all pissed off, blah, blah, blah. And again, that's an emotional issue. And yes, I understand their argument as to, it's bad to have a political party beholden to a corporation. And it really doesn't matter what kind of corporation that is. It's, they're going to put that corporation's interest ahead of everyone else's interests simply because that corporation donates so much money. And then when you add in the fact that the company is a fossil fuel company, well, that's even worse. And, to go back to Michael Avenatti for a minute, he gets people excited. He says the right things to hit people at an emotional level. And the people who are automatically saying, well, I'm no longer going to vote for the Democrats because they're taking this money that from companies I don't like, they're thinking about it at an emotional level, because even if the Democrats are beholden to the fossil fuel companies, the Democrats are not going to take away the rights of people of color, of members of the LGBTQ community, abortion. They're not going to get rid of abortion, but the Republicans are certainly going to try to do all that if they don't actually accomplish that. So, I mean, there are, we can't expect there to be a perfect savior out there as far as politics goes. Whomever's running we're going to dislike for one reason or another. And we need to recognize that and just vote for the Democrat. And when it comes to the primary, we need to vote for whom we think will be the best president and worry less about who's the most electable. Because ideally, and I know this is, fantasy world here, but ideally it shouldn't matter who the Democrats put up to run against Trump. That person should win simply because Trump is so fucking awful. Now, I know that won't be the case, which is why Avenatti worries me, because he is getting people excited. And he is, Trump is a master at putting people down. But they're brutal, they're thuggish put downs, low IQ, low energy, things like that. Avenatti is articulate and intelligent, and he is much more masterful at putting people down than Trump is. So he's going to excite people. He's going to excite people who may not be Democrats, but absolutely hate Trump. So, you'll get people who will vote for Avenatti simply because he's running as a Democrat or because he's not Trump. And then you will get people who are excited to vote for Avenatti because he viciously attacks Trump. And he goes after him and hits him hard and in the same kind of brutal, below-the-belt manner, but he's far more articulate when he does it than Trump could ever hope to be. That's a huge selling point for him, and that's going to attract people. Now, the reason I say Avenatti won't be a good choice for president is not because I think, well, if he went, if he got the nomination and he ran against Trump, he'd lose. No, he'd probably win. But the reason he's a bad choice is because he's sleazy. And I'm not saying he's sleazy just because he's a lawyer. I don't remember which episode of Opening Arguments it is, but it was after the episode of the Stormy Daniels' lawyer is a legal genius. It was a couple episodes after that where Andrew points out that there was some kind of dispute where Avenatti's law firm was going to have to pay out a couple of $1 million to somebody. And Avenatti's law firm is, worth considerably more than that. So it's not really a big deal. I mean, it'd be painful to him, but it wouldn't bankrupt the firm. And right before the deadline for when he was going to have to pay out that money, this homeless guy, using a very obscure part of Florida law, files a lawsuit against Avenatti's law firm because he claimed Avenatti didn't pay him like $40,000 or something like that. And the obscure thing that he did with this lawsuit automatically forced Avenatti's law firm into bankruptcy. At which point, there's no way Avenatti can pay the people the millions of dollars that he owes them, which he could easily afford, assuming his law firm is valued at, is worth what it's valued at. I don't know, but that's something to think about. What if his law firm isn't as valuable as he claims? Well, that's kind of disturbing because that indicates he's as willing to lie about his finances as Trump is, because the most objective estimate of Trump's actual net worth puts him at a mere $400 million, not the $6 to $10 billion he likes to claim. So, and people have talked to this homeless guy who's suing Avenatti and forced his firm into bankruptcy, and the homeless guy says, well, I can't really talk about how I knew to do this and everything else because I've had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with whomever it was who told me about all this and how to do it. So you have to think that it was probably Avenatti who told him that, trying to get out of paying these people the money that he legitimately owed them. And another thing that's disturbing about all this, what with the Russians interfering in the elections and all that, you have two very fiery speakers in Trump and Avenatti. Depending on what the national mood is at the time, if, say, a Green Party candidate was speaking and sounded reasonable and rational, obviously it could not be Jill Stein, but, somebody, they would have far more appeal than either Trump or Avenatti. And if they, happen to get a lot of money from, I don't know, Russia, they could certainly make a bigger splash and possibly siphon votes away from Avenatti, possibly siphon votes away from Trump, or both. And let's say that they won the presidency. Well, yay, it's no longer Trump. But then we end up in the situation, which would suit the Russians just fine, where we effectively have a non-functional government. Because, the Republicans aren't going to work with some Green Party asshole if they don't have to. And the Democrats aren't going to work with some Green Party asshole if they don't have to. And unless there's a significant number of Green Party members in Congress, neither side is going to have to work with the president. And we know there's not going to be a significant number of Green Party candidates running, let alone getting elected to office in 2020. It's just not going to happen. But, a Green Party candidate who's charismatic and calm and rational will stand out in stark contrast to Trump and Avenatti and be very, very appealing to a lot of people. That's a bad thing. It's a very, very bad thing. And we don't want Avenatti to run. We don't want him to be president. But if the Democrats can't find somebody who can, match Avenatti's tone, rhetoric, and, rapier wit, then it's going to be hard to keep Avenatti from winning the primary. And, I'll just go ahead and say it. If Avenatti runs for president, there's a good chance he'll beat Trump. Assuming Trump is still president in 2020, and I'm not at all optimistic he'll be gone by then. I have no idea. It really depends on what happens with the midterm elections and with the Mueller investigation. And something else I want to bring up now that I think about it, about the midterms. There was a article for the about primaries that just happened in Michigan and in Detroit in particular. There were some bad storms. They knocked out the power grid at large sections of Detroit. And because the voting machines were all electronic, people couldn't vote until the power was restored. Now, if somebody goes in to vote after work, it may not be a big deal that they got to wait around for the lights to come back on before they can vote. But if they're there to vote, there on their lunch hour, and they can't vote because, the power is out and they won't get off work until after the polls close, that's not good. Or if they're there before they go to work and they can't vote because the power's out and they won't get off work until after the polls close, that's not good. And we know the Russians have hacked the power grid. So there's nothing to stop them from screwing with the electrical grid in key cities in the 2020, or, in the midterms or the 2020 elections to throw the vote towards one party or another. And we wouldn't necessarily know that the Russians were behind it. And here's why I say that. If you remember a few years ago, more than a few, there was the whole big deal about the malware called Stuxnet. This was a software program, actually a couple of them, that the U.S. government and the Israeli government developed, which they were able to infect the Iranian nuclear equipment with. And they did this through a variety of different means. And the software was so sophisticated that it caused the machines, like the centrifuges, to malfunction, but all the gauges indicated that the machines were running fine until the machines tore themselves apart. So the Russians could do something similar with the power grid. They could ensure that there were things going on which would cause the grid to collapse, but would hide the necessary information about what was going on from the people in the power stations who could stop the problem ahead of time. And I'll just point out that, the government seems to have no interest in doing anything to stop this. So the Russians could, for example, pick areas where they know people lean heavily Democratic, fuck with the power grids there, screws up, significant levels of voting, and it shifts the election to the Republicans. Or, and this is equally plausible, because what the Russians are, want more than anything is to cause chaos in our country. So they could, and this would actually not trigger a lot of suspicion in the beginning, rig it so that heavily Republican areas have lots of trouble with their power. And it causes people in those areas not to vote, ensuring that the Democrats are able to sweep Congress. Well, what's going to happen then? There will be impeachment talks, if not actual impeachment of Trump. Well, that puts us in a chaotic situation. Especially if, the speculation is true that, everybody in the Trump administration is fucking dirty and has ties to the Russians. So, that not only would they take out Trump, they take out Pence, they take out a bunch of other people. That would cause huge problems. It would be very disruptive to our society. Or, if the Democrats just took out Trump, well, you've got Pence in there, and he's going to be fairly weak, like Gerald Ford was after Nixon resigned. And if Pence does what Ford did and pardons Trump, well, that's really going to fuck with him because, and again, it's going to cause chaos. It's also going to make, an outside figure running for president seem more appealing than somebody who's got some experience, which again leads to Avenatti possibly getting the election. And, for us to fix our society, we've got to break the Republican Party. And I'm not saying, because they have to be put out of power. They have to be in a weakened position so that they're forced to re-examine themselves, reshape the party, and, the necessary steps are taken both by the Republicans and the Democrats to limit outside interference in our elections again. But, how likely any of that is to happen, I don't know. But Avenatti scares me about running for president, because he just might get it, and he's not who we need in there. Doesn't, even if he, ignoring his sleazy stuff, he doesn't have the right skill set for what we're going to need. I mean, we're going to have to do a lot of repair work on our government. Forget trying to mend fences with our allies. We've got all kinds of repair work that's got to be done. I mean, the State Department has lost so many employees. So has the Department of Education. So all these things. And then, there's got to be something done about that massive tax cut, which is, causing us to run a huge fucking deficit. And that's going to be tough to tackle. Which, if it's going to be done, if we're going to reverse that tax cut, you need somebody who is charismatic. Which Avenatti most certainly is. But I don't think he has the other skills needed to, actually craft tax reform that'll get through Congress. He might, or he might have enough sense to hire somebody for his administration who does. We don't know. I would much rather have somebody in that White House who I knew understood the problem. But I don't really see them coming. There's talk about Joe Biden running. Biden's too old. Biden has the bad habit of, putting his foot in his mouth. And I don't know whether there's Tulsi Gabbard, but she's got some pretty sketchy connections to various folks in places like Syria and the Middle East. She also has some weird guru who she follows who has some pretty strange ideas. I don't remember all the details about that. But that's, concerning. She's savvy enough. She's basically changed a lot of her political positions in the wake of Bernie Sanders' run for president. She, whether she heard him speak and realized that he's got some good ideas, or she heard him speak and realized that this is a way to get popular, I don't know. I hope it's the former, not the latter, but we'll never know. I don't think. But she, she's got a couple of strikes against her in that she's a Hindu and, is a bit of a brown color and is a woman. But she's also got some pluses. She's intelligent. She's a military veteran. She's very attractive. So she could, pull it off. I don't know. And, it's concerning. I mean, in 2004, when Kerry lost, I was upset, but in the back of my head, I knew, this Obama guy, he's got a real shot if he decides to run, and I really like, what he has to say and how he has to say it. We don't have anybody like that yet. And we kind of need them out there before 2020. We'll just have to see how it goes. Okay. I am going to wrap this up now, because I am tired and I got to get to bed. Again, I apologize for all the weird audio and things like that, but I think you can understand. And I will have a link in the show notes. It'll be the only link in the show notes related to this episode, to an article about the describing the whole power grid going out in Detroit on that primary day. Because it is worth reading. I mean, I'm not saying the Russians were behind that, but if the Russians didn't think about hacking the power grid on Election Day before that event, they certainly are thinking about it now. Because I guarantee you, they were following that election just because they follow every election in the U.S. So when they saw all the shit that was going down, they would have had to have said, fucking with that power grid's not a bad idea on Election Day. And we know that they fucked with Ukraine's power grid right before they invaded Crimea. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that they would choose to do that. All right. I am getting out of here and going to bed. And next episode will be more of the Ethiopian Apocrypha with Skullbeard.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuznuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.